beautiful East Tennessee in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains. You're listening to the Sherry Voluntary Show, and I do appreciate you spending your time with me. Today, I have a rather interesting guest, and you guys, a lot of you may already know who he is, and that is Mr. Michael Heisse, and he is the founder of the Mises Caucus within the Libertarian Party. He's also been a peace and liberty activist for over 10 years, and within that activism, he did a lot of street anarchy and watching the cops and things like that we want people to be doing. So welcome to the show, Mike. How are you?
I'm good, Sherry. Thanks for having me.
Good. It's great to have you. So I know you and I know each other, and I consider you a friend, but we don't technically necessarily agree on the process. But before we get into that aspect of things, I just want to ask you, what made you start the Mises Caucus? Why did you see a need for it within the Libertarian Party?
So I guess to build into that, I should say why I entered the LP in the first place, and then what I observed in that sphere of like why I needed to do this. Well, like so many, I'm a product of the Ron Paul revolution. And after that, after they screwed him the way they did at the end of his campaign, I became an apolitical anarchist and started doing a lot of event organizing, podcasting, street interviews, stuff like that. And so by the time 2016 came around and Rand Paul was running, I mean, obviously we've all known that Rand is not Ron, but you know, I was holding out hope, crossing my fingers that maybe the magic could come back, you know what I mean, and we could strike lightning twice, and that just didn't happen. that just didn't happen, and he fizzled out. And at that point, it was like, all right, well, what do we do now? And so that's when I started entertaining the idea of the LP. So I went into the LP, and Gary Johnson was running, and this is where the conceptualization of the Mises Caucus starts to come in, because essentially I just compared experiences. I compared experiences between the Ron Paul revolution and the Gary Johnson campaign, and it was just night and day. It was just completely night and day. I mean, the Ron Paul revolution was incredible. I honestly consider it one of the best times of my life. Every time you met somebody that was into it, it was like you met your new best friend. Everybody was curious. Everybody was motivated. Everybody had faith in what we were doing. Everybody believed in what we were doing. And everybody was just on generally the same page. And you didn't have all this crazy infighting. Then I, went over the Gary Johnson campaign. It was like incredibly difficult to get motivated. And the environment was just nasty. It was just nasty. I mean, we were not cohesive at all. We were fighting amongst each other about how bad, Johnson is, or how bad Weld is, and Trump, you libertarians voting for Trump are the problem. No, you libertarians voting for Bernie is the problem. Oh, you libertarians not voting is the problem. And nobody even had like their eye on the prize, and it was just like a totally nasty night and day thing. So my observation was I want the Ron Paul revolution back. I want that environment back. So what I felt was that if we could what I observed with the Ron Paul thing was that even though he wasn't winning politically, he was still getting huge moral wins that kind of carried our sails, so to speak. Every time he got on stage and he made a fool of people, every time he got on stage and they were afraid of his intelligence, and he was just courageously telling the truth, all the way up to and including, turning Bible Belt South Carolina into pro-heroin, like in a debate. And it was just electric. And but what I felt is that by doing these things, he initiated a positive feedback loop that just kept growing and growing and growing. And so what I would like to see is if we could ever somehow recreate that in the form of an organization as opposed to a singular campaign, then theoretically the revolution never has to die. It could keep going and going and going. And that's what we need, because I feel very strongly that while it was cool for a little while in the aftermath of the Ron Paul thing, all these different personalities and platforms started popping up. And, we started having more in-depth conversations about anarchism and minarchism and the different forms of anarchism and what would a free society look like. And it was cool for a while, but then it started, I think because there wasn't a nexus of action to come up behind all that stuff, that the debate soon started becoming arguments. And then that's when the divisions started. And I feel like we fundamentally lost faith in what we believe in across that time. So I would like to see that happen again. And I think the best vehicle for that is through the Libertarian Party, as flawed as it is.
Yeah. I tell you, in my year and a half in the party, that's one of the things that I saw a lot of is, especially a lot of the others. And I say others because I, I hazard to say that most people who call themselves minarchists within the Libertarian Party are not actually minarchists. They just want less government than Republicans want, which is a whole lot of damn government. But I had lots of people that I would come across telling me, the problem with the party is anarchists. We need to get the anarchists out of the party. Clearly, they're ignorant of the founding of the party and where it comes from. But my idea as well was always that as a voluntarist who does not vote in the voting process anymore, that I could make a difference by having a platform within the political system. And that seems to me to be the best use of the Libertarian Party, because you kind of end up with the same problem if it's not. Because if you just plug and play in libertarians in the state, well, the state is inherently evil because it violates those core values of libertarianism. So how do we get to that point where we've got people who have been vying for power, have if they ever get it, eventually get it, and then ask them also to be resistant to the corruption of that power and dismantle themselves? Like that's where I see things going within that.
I don't think we necessarily need to have them dismantle themselves. That's the thing, and that's what I think this would be the best use of the Libertarian Party. Now, I do think that LP should run presidential candidates, not to win, but because that's basically the main spokesperson of our principles. Mm-hmm. And so assuming they actually do that, if they do well and they get to the debate access, that means that people are actually supporting that message and all of that. But generally speaking, I don't think the best use of the party is federal elections outside of the promotion of a presidential race, because it's so tilted against us. Yeah. The resources that you have to expend are so much, and we get smacked every time anyway. So I think what is more viable and reasonable and doable is a bottom-up revolution. And I think that actually makes a lot more sense for where we are as a party. Sure. And that's a core tenet of the Mises Caucus. So bottom-up revolution kind of looks a lot like decentralization. Sure. And we see this politically all over the place in pieces. Weed legalization. So we don't need the federal government to say, you know what, I don't see a use for myself anymore. Let's just kill ourselves. You don't need, it doesn't have to be that way. You could nullify the feds by using federalism, essentially, by using the city council to decriminalize weed, or using the state government to legalize weed. That's just one issue. But you can do this for a whole variety of things.
Okay. Yeah. So where do you see the Mises Caucus going? What direction? Is it to basically have a platform for real libertarianism, the very core values of libertarianism, or what do you see the goal of the Mises Caucus being?
So twofold. I would say one, principally, we want to carry on the spirit of the Ron Paul revolution. So, Austrian economics, very much so anti-war, very much so anti-state, and just having that spirit, like I said, of the Ron Paul revolution. Now, politically, what I would say the purpose of it is doing probably what the Libertarian Party itself should already be focusing on, which is the bottom up. So we actually just launched a PAC, with a political action committee, a hybrid PAC called Mises PAC, and so what we're doing with that is, to make a long story short, we have 2 bank accounts for this thing under one committee. And one of them we can use to give direct donations right to the candidate. And that's what we're going to do. But we're going to be focusing on local and county level candidates around the country that are principled and viable. Now, the other account is a super PAC, so we could do different things with that. And what I want to do with that is essentially pay activists to go out and work for legislative causes. So, 24 or 26 states, they have ballot initiatives, right? So a good example is there was just a ballot initiative in Denver, Colorado, the first of its kind, to decriminalize psilocybin mushrooms. I got in early with that organization before it was ever even on the ballot. And so we helped them. And that thing only passed by less than 2,000 votes. So, Ron Paul has this saying that liberty brings people together. Now, it doesn't it does when you go by the issues. You can, the shroom thing was all Democrats, but they took our help. And now, but the thing is, there's ripple effects here that are very important, because now not only did that pass in Denver and make history, but the executive director of that effort, in my last phone call with him, is now calling himself a libertarian. And then on top of that, that paved the way for another initiative that passed not long after in Oakland, where they actually upped the ante and said, not only are we going to decriminalize shrooms, we're going to decriminalize every natural psychedelic. So shrooms, ibogaine, DMT, ayahuasca, peyote, all of that stuff. And because of that, in the aftermath of that, there's now, I saw in reports, 80 groups that have reached out to the group in Oakland that passed that on, how did you do it? How do we do it? What's the language? So that is spreading, and we were at the we were connected to the epicenter of it. I don't want to, it was Decriminalize Denver's effort, and but now we have that foot in the door, and we have that coalition, and there's good stuff there. So, there's 24 or 26 states where you can do ballot initiatives like that. Otherwise, you're going to have to lobby, and that's the other thing. So we actually have a page on our website called Our Actions, lpmisescaucus.com, where we have it broken down by local initiatives and state initiatives. And we have a whole bunch of examples of sample legislation that we have 40 plus organizers around the country for them to try to carry out and pass where they can. And I'm leading by example right here at home by decriminalizing my town in Norristown, Pennsylvania, and it's working.
That's great. It reminds me a lot about what Michael Bolden, Mike Meharry have been doing at the 10th Amendment Center, which
we're partnered with them.
Yeah, they're wonderful. I mean, they're absolutely wonderful. And we've had this discussion, them and I, several times about the incrementalism, where, I'm not necessarily, I wouldn't call myself, I haven't settled on whether incrementalism is totally good thing or not, in all aspects, but certainly what they've been doing, what you guys have been doing, working with the psychedelics, it's working. Like, you see it working with cannabis laws across the country. People are really much more open to it. I saw it working with gay marriage back in the 90s, late 90s, when I lived in Wisconsin. Madison, Wisconsin was one of two cities, I think the other was Honolulu, Hawaii, that had legal gay marriage recognized within their city. And so these movements within cities are really important. And I think it sounds really small at first, but then when you see something like what's been done in Denver with, or in Colorado with cannabis, and then, other states saying, hey, we can take up this initiative as well, or things being done in Denver with, the psilocybin has inspired other cities where it's a much smaller group of people to get to.
Well, and it has to start out. It has to start out small. I mean, our neighborhoods are small, and that's where, at least through the LP, where we have the most effect and the most bang for our buck, so to speak. But you can, if you have enough people committed, you could make big waves in starting off with little ripples. So, like one example of something we would like to do is we want to write up a resolution. Now, of course, a resolution is not an ordinance and it's not a bill. It doesn't tangibly change policy, but it does make a statement. And so what we want to do is actually write up some kind of sample resolution for a local level first, and basically say, I'll use my town as an example. Norristown, Pennsylvania opposes the wars. I'm speaking broadly here. And so we do that, and then we can start to pass that off in other towns. Now, if you look at the history here, Ron Paul 08 got all the veteran support. Ron Paul 2012 got all the veteran support. Gary Johnson 2016, believe it or not, did very well with the military crowd. Tulsi Gabbard last night just swept the polls after her debates, and they're doing the same thing that they did with Ron Paul and said it was all trolls.
I saw that this morning.
And so, peace is popular. Mm-hmm. It might not be popular in the mainstream, but peace is popular because people fundamentally want peace, mm-hmm. And so I think we could, so let's say I were to do that and I get it passed in 30 towns in Pennsylvania. Well, then all of a sudden you have a case to start going to the state legislature to get, hey, Pennsylvania opposes this war. Then you make a statement there. Now, that's just assuming that this is in a vacuum in one state. Let's say you get 6 states to do it. Now, all of a sudden, we are basically filing a redress of grievance against the wars. We're indicting the wars at that point.
Yeah.
So is it a tangible piece of legislation? Can you bring the troops home from state government or even lower? No, but we can at least open up that conversation. And that's just one of the many, many things that we could do. I mean, there's weed legalization, there's preventing your local police from enforcing federal gun control laws, there's facial recognition, there's stingray, there's taxes, there's regulations,
Pick a subject and get moving.
Yeah.
Ron Paul was recently on my co-host from Postcards from Somalia, Alan Mosley, on his show, The Gold Standard. And
talked to him last night.
Yeah, Alan's great. And one of the things that he had said on there is the peace candidate always wins. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to stay peaceful. Of course, we know politicians lie to us all the time. And Tulsi Gabbard, while she is generally anti-war, she has supported many war things surrounding that. So I hesitate to throw all in behind her because she's at this point, the peace candidate. But
just to be clear, no libertarian should be throwing all in behind her.
Right. Yeah. I don't even vote, so I'm not throwing it behind anybody. But, I see a lot of libertarians get excited about her, and I think they're excited that someone is getting attention who is saying the things that we've been saying, like, hey, let's not murder people. How about that? And so it's exciting, but I think that's one of the things that you talk about, the Ron Paul revolution. I was still a neocon when Ron Paul was running for president. I know. And I thought the man was crazy. Like, I loved some of his fiscal conservatism. I loved that. I thought he was nuts when it came to foreign policy and the drug war. And I remember, watching him in that South Carolina debate. And this guy's talking about legalizing heroin. Like, I just couldn't. And I've gone back. So I sort of missed the whole Ron Paul revolution thing. But I've heard other people.
We all do.
Yeah, I've missed it. And so I've heard Tom Woods speak in the same way. Like, it was just a really special time. And I think it's that cohesiveness of ideas, for one, when you can sort of, it's like any cops or soldiers. I hate to use those examples, but they generally bond very strongly and very quickly because they're fighting together. They're in the trenches together. Right? So anytime you do something hard with someone else, it really bonds you. And I think that's what many people on his campaign initially felt, was that they were the small minority standing against the big giant Republican Party and making waves. And that really made a cohesiveness.
I personally bring it back to something intangible. I really think it has to do with concepts like faith. I really do. I think at the time we had faith that we could actually change things and that we could actually affect things. And I think over time that's been lost. And I think that's very dangerous. Mm-hmm. It's soul deadening is what it is. It's because what's the point of being passionate about what we believe and being right in what we believe if it's all for nothing, if that's how you feel? So that's why that faith is important. Faith will keep you going when it seems like the odds are against you. And if you don't have that faith, well, then I think you would have a lot of things like what we have now, like people pointing fingers at each other all the time, and who's the biggest, baddest libertarian on the block, and who's got the best strategy, and you're not a real libertarian, I'm a libertarian, and all these things. So I think getting that faith back is very, very important.
Do you think that a lot of that has to do with, I can't think of another libertarian candidate, and I know Ron Paul was in the Republican Party, but clearly he's a libertarian, that has been able, like, I see the respectability politics that has really creeped into the to the Libertarian Party. We're like, don't say that. We need people to vote for us. We're never going to get people to vote for us if you talk like that. And the things they're saying not to say are libertarian things that Ron Paul said. And I think one of the things that as I've looked back on it, that seemed to really get people going was the fact that he would tell them the hard thing that they didn't want to hear, but would do it anyways. And they respected that and knew, like, hey, this is a guy who's telling us that the drug war has failed and it's not working and we should do something different. So do you, I haven't seen a
He
candidate from the
he
LP that
told
can do that.
right, and and that's I think part of it is because even though he was running a campaign and even though he was in the political system, I don't think politics was the primary motivation behind the run.
Hmm.
And again, this goes back into faith. It's kind of a weird thing, at least in my opinion. It goes back into faith because it just so happens that he did, in my opinion, he did better politically by casting aside the political aspects of it and just said, I'm going to tell the truth. I'm just going to go out there and tell the truth. And that was all he had to do. And it started this huge movement. Whereas libertarians who have focused on the political aspect of things, well, we can't talk about legalizing heroin. We have to be reasonable.
Right.
We have to be socially liberal and fiscally conservative. And
Oh, I hate that
that
so
doesn't
much.
motivate anybody. But that doesn't motivate anybody. It might be good ideas, and they might even be good ideas, and they might even be reasonable ideas. But reason doesn't win in the system because it's unreasonable. It's intangible things that win. It's a matter of what makes you have faith, what makes you motivated, what makes you inspired.
Sure.
And the truth does that.
Yeah, it is very electrifying when you hear someone. Back in my more religious days, I remember there was a particular teacher that I really just often like the things he said were things that I didn't necessarily want to do.
Yeah.
But they were things that electrified me because I knew that's what I needed to do.
There's one other person. Now, I would say it's somewhat tangential to the libertarian movement, but I would say there's significant overlap and it matters. But the only other person or phenomena that I've seen or experienced anything like that is Jordan Peterson. The phenomenon around Jordan Peterson has been absolutely electric too. In a different way. I mean, he is out there championing the individual. He's not a libertarian theorist, and his is more on the nature of the self and psychology and phenomenology and stuff like that. So it's a somewhat tangential thing, but but again, he went out there and courageously told the truth, and that's all he had to do.
Sure.
We don't have to put bells and whistles on it. We don't have to, make it radical and get on stage and be naked, and we don't have to make it political and bore people to death in a hopeless endeavor in a third party that can't win. We just have to tell the truth. That's it.
Authenticity. People have a really good inner barometer, say, of what's authentic when someone's being authentic with them. And I think that's sort of what has happened with Jordan Peterson is that people, a lot of people felt and have felt the way he's the things that he's taught, but he's put it into such a great package, and he's really authentic about it. He believes these things. And I know my son, for one, who's 16, loves Jordan Peterson, and it's that.
Cool son.
Especially, yeah, he's awesome. But I think young men especially have been drawn to him because he's telling them the hard thing of that you need responsibility. You need difficult things in your life. You need to have responsibilities. And people, I think, generally they don't want the easiest life necessarily. They want to take on responsibilities. And with responsibilities comes challenges at times. And that's really what makes people have a good life.
Yeah, I could spend the whole show talking about Jordan Peterson. The other one is not just responsibility, but that happiness isn't the primary objective of life. And you're probably going to be less happy if you go to make that the primary objective of your life because happiness isn't sustaining. Somebody in your life's going to die. You're going to get sick. Your car is going to die. You're going to have a shitload of debt. You know what I mean? Like bad things are going to happen, and happiness doesn't sustain through that, but meaning does.
Yes.
Meaning does. So, I forget what number rule it is, but pursue what is meaningful and not what is expedient. And that is a universal. Truth is pretty meaningful. And I think that's why it resonates.
Yeah.
Political expediency does not resonate, and that's why it does.
People know when they're being lied to, and the sad thing that I see, and this is just an observation, could be anecdotal, but is that people know they're being lied to by politicians, but they sort of want to be lied to because they want to participate in the game. They want their guy to win. They want to feel like the things that they believe matter to more than just them, and that this country is going in the right direction. And, all of these sort of things that play
Your
into people being in the
your
political system.
your tribe, so to speak, can fill that role of being a part of something bigger than yourself. It might be short term and it might be towards not so good ends,
Right.
but if you are seeking that out, it can do that.
Yeah.
And again, this goes back into another thing that Peterson talks about, and I think it's applicable to some libertarians and frankly some libertarians in the party, of if allowing ideology to be a religion and becoming ideologically possessed.
Yeah.
And I think we see a lot of that both on the apolitical and political side. You see some dumbass LPers or Ron Paul's not a libertarian because he's in the GOP.
Right.
That's dumb. And then you see it, I would say, on the other side where it's like, oh, well, if you're trying to, I mean, I had somebody recently tell me that I used to respect that I'm a statist because I got Shroom Decrim to pass. I helped to get Shroom Decrim passed because that is using the political system.
Yeah.
That both are examples, apolitical and political, of, I would say, ideological possession, where you were so rigid that you were just not in touch with reality anymore.
I think I get what you're saying completely. I know Mike Meharry and I have had many talks about this, about how, you pick a strategy, you do what you can, and you move forward, and you just have to forget, like, maybe a stronger word there, the other people who have a negative opinion about it, because clearly what, say, the 10th Amendment Center, what they've been doing has been working. It's been, they've been fighting the NSA actively. Like, it's working. They're getting these things in, and it's I think there's a couple layers, and one is just a matter of strategy. Like, I don't necessarily agree. Like, I love Lysander Spooner, and I feel like the defensive voting, I used to be there, I used to be in that category of, I believed in defensive voting. But what I see is that you're not voting on, if you were voting on one issue as opposed to another, that would be one thing, because you can either say yay or nay. But when you're voting on a person, that person can tell you what they want. And then, of course, as we know, every politician who gets in office rarely fulfills the promises that they made. So you're going to get, maybe, I don't think the political system only has bad things. Like, there have been some good things done in the political system, but the magnitude of the bad is so much greater that it makes it difficult for me. And two, for me, one of my core foundations is to not violate other people, and so I feel like it's a violation of other people. So that's a personal thing. I don't hate you or anyone else who, I mean, I don't, and I came to that conclusion in my own life that I could not personally vote for things that are going to force anyone else to do anything that they don't feel good about. So I don't want to play that game, but I have chosen a different strategy. What's going to work? I have no friggin' clue. None of us do.
Well, the fact of the matter is that there isn't any one path. There's multiple paths. We need to, I would argue that we do need political action, but that's not the end all be all. We need education, but more than that, we also need culture. We need libertarians to become doctors. We need libertarians to become lawyers. We need libertarians to become respected members of society that people give a shit what they think and say. Mm-hmm. Like we have to hit it on all fronts, because we're under attack on all fronts.
True.
We're under attack politically. We're under attack. Our children, they take our children when they can't even fucking talk. The state teaches them to read and write. You know what I mean? Like, and so, they're taking over pop culture. They're taking over entertainment. They're taking over comedy. They're taking over everything. So we have to defend ourselves in a 360-degree manner, and it's absolutely exhausting. But it's what the founders kind of, I think, were getting at by the requirement of eternal vigilance. Mm-hmm. That's the libertarian plight. We're under it. We're outgunned. We're outnumbered. We're completely surrounded. And then the people who we're not surrounded by are like agents in the Matrix that they're completely plugged in and could become an agent at any time if betray their attachment to the system, and it's tough. It's tough, but it's But you have to, again, to me, it comes back to faith. You ultimately, or at least I do, have faith that the human spirit is stronger than the control.
Yeah. And I believe in people. That's why I guess I've picked the more cultural aspect of trying to change culture, trying to, at least in some small way, trying to get the ideas of voluntarism out there. And I think those ideas, once people, at first they hear anarchy and they're afraid, right? And so I had the wonderful opportunity to have a radio show locally, and then most recently to guest on the local morning show, and basically once a week and spend 3 hours a day talking about voluntarism, talking about anarcho-capitalism. And at first people wanted me kicked off the show. They did. They called the owners. They didn't even call.
You betrayed their attachment to the system.
Exactly. And then the host, who's a wonderful person named Grant Henry, who he's not an anarchist. He's a constitutionalist, but he's very intellectually honest, and he appreciates my point of view. And he made a stand. He said, "Look, I'm going to have her on my show. So just deal with it." And then over the next few weeks, people would message me and say, "I thought you were crazy, but you've made me think about this. You've made me consider that maybe police have too much power, that maybe they should be held to the same standard." Just things like that. And that to me is a huge win, just to bring down the state a couple notches in their
paradigm busting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, I think that's one thing that maybe people like myself sometimes underestimate the value of, is you don't have to bring them all the way to your point of view, but you can start them on a process that may continue.
Yeah. But I would argue that Ron Paul, at least for our point of view, has been the biggest paradigm buster in recent history.
Yeah.
And that was through a campaign.
Right. That's true. I really think that that's one thing I did want to speak with you about as well was, Ron Paul brought a lot of people to the Libertarian Party from a diverse array of ideas. And in my opinion, I don't think the Libertarian Party has done a very good job of teaching those people libertarianism.
No.
And I think I saw it at my own state convention when I was involved. A gentleman got up. They were letting candidates have a few minutes to speak. The last guy to get up said, "Well, I've been a libertarian since January." This was March. "And I pretty much believe everything libertarians believe." And that was it. And talking to him, he couldn't enunciate one libertarian value, one libertarian principle. And I remember talking to someone in power in the party here who said, I was telling him, this is disrespectful. Not only is it disrespectful to the man himself, because he's going to waste his time and energy speaking about something he has no idea, representing something he has no clue about. He's going to waste his time and energy and money. But it's disrespectful to libertarianism itself. It's disrespectful to the philosophy that I love, that I built a lot of my life around. And so I think that's very disrespectful to allow someone, just so that you can say you ran a candidate that is a libertarian. It's just that kind of strategy to me is so disheartening. I feel really disheartened by that people would not, just for the sake of running a candidate, they don't care about the principles. And this is leadership in the party. And this is someone I actually love. He's a very good friend.
I would argue that this is why the Mises Caucus project is needed, because you have, the Libertarian Party has faction wars just like the other ones. We are the Mises Caucus, and then there's the Radical Caucus, and then there's the Pragmatic Caucus, then there's even the oxymoronic Libertarian Socialist Caucus, and all these different factions that are essentially vying for control of the prevailing winds in the party. And so I would say right now that there are significant parts that value what we were talking about earlier, the focus on the political aspect versus the principle aspect. And, on the surface, they have certain points on the surface, that this is a political party and political parties exist to get people elected. And yeah, that's true. But there's a character in how you do it. Yeah. There's absolutely a character in how you do it. And yes, you want to get people, you want to get votes, you want to get elected. But when you're a third party that nobody knows about, then part of what you need to do is educate people. I mean, what is a campaign if not educating people on what you think and what you believe so that they might vote for you?
Absolutely. And that's to me is the only, for my personal opinion, the only use of the Libertarian Party is to educate. I think that would be the best thing. If you want to make a difference from the inside, if you think you can do that, I don't necessarily think that's possible, but like my mayor, Glenn Jacobs, runs as a Republican. He's a great guy. I love him. But he's running as a Republican. I think, and somebody's going to shoot me for this, but I think any libertarian that wants to change something on the inside should run as a Republican, because you've got that tons of branding behind you, all that stuff. But if you want to teach people, you should be in the Libertarian Party doing that. Well,
let me address that, because I feel a couple ways about that. Yes. So I would say in the short term, yes. In the short term, yeah. It's hard. It's hard to argue that the Libertarian Party is more viable than the, or did I say it backwards? It's hard to argue that the LP is more viable than the GOP, because the GOP had Ron, got Rand, Massey, Amash, Mike Lee, and then you've also got Young Americans for Liberty. Now, they're not a Republican organization; they're nonpartisan. They help liberty candidates, and they helped three and. They've been trying to focus at the state house level, and they got 38 people elected, and they were all Liberty Republicans. They tried to help 3 LP state house races. They just didn't win. They tried to help 1 independent running Libertarian, and they didn't win. So yeah, it's if you are in the we want to make differences at a large level right now, then it's hard to argue that that the LP is more viable than the GOP. But I noticed my saving grace there is in the short term, because look at what they do now. You got so I saw Eric Brakey in Maine. I think he's still elected as a state house member up there. Saying, "Oh, I support Trump, but Tulsi Gabbard sounded good on war last night." And look at what Rand does. Now, I don't fault him for doing it, but I get why he does it, but he has to. Basically, my point is that as long as the GOP is our most viable option politically, we're always going to be juggling competing interests, and the interests are principles versus surviving in a party that doesn't like us. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So long term, we're going to have to build our own thing.
Yeah, isn't that what is happening already though in the Libertarian Party? I mean, honestly, you have, I would say, a large majority of the party are what people claim they are, Republicans who want to smoke weed. Like that seemed to be
that isn't
maybe not a large majority. Okay,
that isn't my experience. My experience is more that it's a lot of people who don't know what they're well, first of all, there's a lot of good people. I don't want to seem like
good people,
but and there's a lot of people who have had success. But I think there's no cohesion. And I think, again, it goes back to that we don't have defining leaders. Mm-hmm. We don't, and lead. I don't mean leaders in the, the authoritative sense. I mean like the organic sense. Like Larry Sharpe is a leader. Ron Paul is a leader.
Not really,
I mean, you can't argue with the results. In that I watched him. He was going to 3 events a day, packing the rooms and telling people about libertarianism. In New York, where it's not popular, like it's breaking people's paradigms. But I would say there's no cohesive strategy, and that's what we're trying to do with the Mises Caucus and the Mises PAC. Because if you talk to people in the LP, they'll all say we need to focus at the bottom. We need to focus on building a bench across the country, of local candidates, sheriffs, city council, judges, school boards, all this kind of stuff. And yet there's no and there's no infrastructure to kind of like push that along. And that's what we're doing with Mises PAC, is trying to push that along. But I would say that the arguments in the LP are I would say they're cultural and they're strategic more than like they are principled, but we have something that theoretically like that should deal with that. Like we have what's called the Dallas Accord, which basically states that the LP doesn't take a position on whether it's a minarchist and anarchist party, which I think is great because then you can just focus on the principles and how you interpret them and how you apply them within, I would say, legitimate reason, you know. But yeah, we other than that, you know, you got some people who want to take the party culturally left, which is totally against our interests. You got some people who want to, yeah, and that's a cultural problem, you know. And then you have some people who, you know, they strategically they think, well, Bill Weld would be a good presidential candidate because he's got name recognition and because he was two-term governor. And on the surface, that makes sense. But again, there's a character to how we have to do these things. And Ron, in my opinion, is a blueprint there. And then there's also the whole big 35, 40-year-old split between the Mises Cato wing, and that's a whole nother story. And you know, yeah, it's not perfect. It's not, but you know, for me, I've been in the game for about 11 years now. I've done street interviews. You know, I've organized events. I've organized End the Feds. I've written. I've done podcasting. I've, you know, taken serious risks, cop blocking. I've done it all, and I can honest to God say that I've seen more tangible results in the past 2 years, almost 2 years since I started the Mises Caucus, than I ever did in all the years prior of doing that. Because, so like you said, the only use is to be educational through campaigns. So let me ask you this. I told you we have that Our Actions page where it's like sample legislation for all of these things at the local and state level. Mm-hmm. Now we have 300 something libertarians elected at the local level. So let's say I built an email list of all of our elected libertarians and said, hey, check out this page. Is any one of these actions viable in your area? I will rewrite it to be right for your town if you can, for you if you don't have time. Can you do any of these? What if we get 30 of them? Is that not good?
Again, well, what I would say to that is not everything that they do through the political process is bad, but are any of them calling for ending taxation in their town? Like, I want to see those things happen. I want to see those solutions kind of come about, and maybe it's short-sighted. I don't know. I want to see like actual libertarian values coming to pass with the process, not trying to keep power. And I don't think it's the people. Like, I never want people to think that I think that people that are involved with the Libertarian Party are bad people, because I clearly don't believe that. And I still, like, I go to Libertarian Party meetings. I spoke at one recently. Like, I understand, like, we can be allies. It's okay. I don't hate people. I don't attribute evil to people because they have a different strategy than I do, and that I personally don't want to be involved in the violence inherent in the system. I don't want to do that. But there is violence.
Shall we start the voting thing now?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we've already been sort of talking about that.
Okay.
But I just don't.
Here's the problem that I see with the anarchist argument, and here's what kind of made me cross over. The most common argument, and I understand, and I get it, is that by participating, you're giving them legitimacy. And I don't think that matters. Like, I don't think that, like, in any way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say that is because the government doesn't run off of your legitimacy.
They've already got that part pretty much.
And I think there's a personal thing that is hard for people to accept to kind of get to my position, and that is, you might not like it. You might be able to elaborate on every single solitary way that this is wrong and illegitimate. But you have masters. You have masters. They have power over you. They will haul you off if you break their dictates. You are beholden to that, whether you like it or not. And there's nothing you can do about it. You are a slave. You are a slave.
There's nothing you can do about it, but that's
no. Well, the only things that we can do about it are vote them out, decentralize them, or kill them. Like, I mean, that's the only, it's really the only options we have. And I don't think the killing them thing is going to work out very well. And I don't think it's going to earn us any friends.
Yeah.
And
We'll end up with something worse than we already have.
yeah. And so that one's out the window. So then you're left with what? In my opinion, you don't get to say, well, so the whole thing is duress, right? So we accept already that if somebody puts a gun up to your head and says, sign this contract, right? That even if you sign the contract or adhere to the contract, that legally speaking, that it's not valid because it was under duress. Well, think of the government as like a systemic duress over everybody. So you don't even have really the option to act out your principles as you would in the natural world because you have this, metaphorical gun to your head. And you don't get to make the rules and you don't get to say how it is that we change things from that point. You can only work with what you got. So I would say but I think a lot of people have a very hard time upstairs accepting that you really are not free in a very real and direct sense.
I would agree with you except for I think that is not considering other alternatives to how you can live free. They may not be the best. People aren't going to be able to live like I do right now.
But they're not living free. They're not living free. That's the thing. So all right. I'm guessing that you're talking about agorism, right?
Agorism, Vonuism. I just have learned about this new strategy, so I'm going to have someone. I brought some books. I'm reading on it, and it's an interesting.
We'll stick with agorism for now. There's no agorist factories. There's no agorist means of production. There's just agorist reselling of things that were already paid in the official status market, right? So you can't build an underground free market because they'll come for you, And we also just saw the headline a few weeks ago where the seasteaders are facing the death penalty from the Taiwan government.
Right.
You can't get away, and even if you could. You're just building a little enclave like Zion in the Matrix, and you're surrounded by the machines anyway. Like it doesn't actually reduce the state.
Yeah, I think it's the difference between a short game and a long game. Honestly, I do think it's a difference in strategy. The cultural way is not satisfying. I get that because I don't look at it and go, oh, there's one marker. I know we did this. We didn't help get psilocybin legalized.
Well, you get people telling you, and that's good.
Yeah,
and then assuming your audience grows.
Yeah. I'm just saying that it's a long game. The cultural aspect is a much longer game, and it's not necessarily as quantifiable as political action. But for me personally, it's the one that I can look in the mirror myself and go, I didn't hurt anybody today. I didn't force them to do anything. Like I said, it's a strategy. I get that, and I don't know how things are going to go. Look, I think the system is going to collapse in on itself way before any of this matters.
I do too, and that's why I think and I do too, and I think that's fundamentally why it's incredibly important that we do get politically involved, particularly at the local and state level. Because let me lay out a scenario for you. Let's say we have a collapse, right? Now, here's my personal opinion of the broad strokes of part of what's going to happen with that. The federal government's going to blame capitalism, right? It's going to blame freedom.
Rich people.
Yeah. So it's going to blame freedom. And so then in response to that, they are going to then propose a solution to the problem that they created. Could be some cool, nifty government cryptocurrency. It could be, who knows? It could be now we're moving on to a more centralized government or a more international government or something like that. Who knows? So if we assume that is going to be what happens, and I also think that they're going to have the media behind them, because what's going to happen? The cities in particular, the people who are dependent, there's more people who are on the purse strings than there are in the workforce anymore, or at least there was as of like 3 years ago. I don't, right. So that's a lot of people who are incentivized to fight for that system, and the cities are going to not be a good place, and the media is going to say, oh, look at this suffering, look what freedom did, we have to go to more authoritarianism. And I think the only way that we could reasonably do anything about that is to have very, very brave people in the localities, in the states, who say, no, you did this, fuck you, you're going to have to kill us. And if you don't have anybody in that place, and they're just your typical politicians, they're going to shell up, they're going to give in, and they're going to go with it, and they're going to take the money that comes, the new cool crypto or whatever the hell it might be, that they the centralized crypto that betrays its original vision, and or whatever it might be, and they're going to be spineless, and they're just going to go with it.
Yeah, I don't know that there are, I see libertarian candidates a lot of times, supporting the war machine, supporting public education. So I don't know, like you said, there's a problem with cohesiveness. I don't know that there's enough cohesiveness where that actually will matter either. I think, and this is from my point of view, that building communities, building your community of other people, like-minded people in your area is probably a better way to go. And maybe that affects the political sphere because people's minds have changed.
The cohesion will solve itself. I truly believe that, and here's why. Now, I don't take this to mean strictly politically, because going back to what I said, Ron Paul was generating wins by being brave and all of that. So I don't necessarily strictly mean believing. But there's a saying in the sports world that winning solves everything.
People love a winner.
Right. So all we got to do is start winning, and I don't necessarily. I mean, yes, I would like to see political victories, but that's not the full scope of what I mean. We've just got to start feeling good again and have something to feel good about again. And it will initiate the feedback loop. And if we ever do that, like we did under Ron, if that thing will start to recoalesce again, because we're not all at each other's throats. There's something tangible. There's something we can hang our hats on. There's something that's working that we can feel good about and join in. Winning solves everything, whether it's cultural wins, whether it's educational wins, whether it's legitimate political wins, whatever. Winning will solve everything.
Sure. Okay, well, on that note, it's come to the end of our time. It's been a great discussion. I enjoy talking about these things. I don't want people to think I attribute evil to the LP.
We're good.
People in the LP. Yeah, we're all just trying to do our best, right, and make our own way. So I get that, and I just do my best to put my point of view out there, and people who are going to join me, and those who don't have to do what they can deal with. But it's not that what you're saying doesn't make sense. I'll say that, and I really appreciate as far as who you are. I appreciate your tenacity. You are a very tenacious person. I remember.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, when you were getting all this off the ground, and we were initially talking on Messenger about everything you were doing, I thought, dude, this guy is a go-getter and a half. Really, really busted your ass. So, no matter what, I respect that tremendously, because it's not easy being in the public light, and I know that you've dealt with a lot of pushback, shall we say, within the party, and a lot of things, that maybe
from a small crowd. I would say from a small crowd of people who were proud of 3% and Bill Weld. But
right. So I appreciate that. And why don't you tell us, or if you have anything else you want to add, go right ahead.
So I guess I'll just do a big pitch and go into just give a little overview of some of the things that we're working on, lightning round. So we're working on something called Ask an Austrian, which is monthly content that we're going to start out monthly, and the idea is that it's very simple. We're going to collect questions from our audience regarding to economics and regarding to libertarian theory and libertarian ethics. And we've gotten 2 senior fellows and two fellows from the Mises Institute that is going to take these questions and answer them pre-recorded on camera, and then we'll publish them, and it's Ask an Austrian. So we'll have the page up for that soon. We're also organizing a rally in Washington, D.C. for September 21st, September 21st, which the UN has designated as International Day of Peace. So we're throwing an anti-war rally, a peace rally called Peace Over Politics. And the idea behind that is that we want to have 6 speakers, 2 from the left, 2 from the right, 2 libertarian. Between us, we're going to have the low-key majority because our MC is going to be libertarian, but and try to bring people together on that issue. So we're doing that. We just launched Mises Pack, so misespack.com, and you can sign up to be a monthly recurring supporter of that effort to help us with what we're calling our decentralized revolution, which I've touched on the strategy behind that, and we have Ron Paul's endorsement.
Right, that's cool. I went to the Mises Caucus party in New Orleans, of course, and had a great time. And yes, he did. He gave you a glowing endorsement along with one of the best speeches I've ever heard, and that was Tom Wood's speech there. It was brilliant, and it was very inspiring.
Yes.
Was
it just me, or was it like he kind of went out of his mind? Like I kind of felt like I was watching Eminem freestyle.
Yeah, it was certainly a one of those special moments in a person, you had to be there kind of thing. But it had such great points and such clarity and vision that would be amazing if we could have that sort of, like, not everybody has to like Tom Woods, not everybody has to agree on every issue with him, but you got to respect the man. Like he's definitely earned at least my respect, and he's taught a lot of people about. He's the reason that I'm an anarchist now at this point was from listening to his show and learning from him. So I believe in giving credit where credit's due, and he certainly deserves, I think, a lot more credit than many would like to give him. But I did want to say one more thing about the Libertarian Party, and that is, one of the other things I see as a really good value to the party, and something that was good for me anyways, was not only friendships. I mean, that's great. You get to know people, but the sort of iron sharpeneth iron, to use a Bible verse, that I learned so much from being involved in all of those arguments about different, whatever it is that people are talking about at the time. That I think that is such a valuable, it's an easy place to go and find people who are in your camp enough that you're starting from a similar premise, but when you get into the weeds of it, you can really kind of learn a lot from. So that I thought is a really good aspect about the party, and that the arguments aren't necessarily bad. It's any animosity and attribution of evil to other people for feeling differently. I think that's really a problem, and that's a personal issue, not really a party issue. So
absolutely.
Anyways, Mike, it was great talking to you, and this conversation was a lot more interesting than I thought it would be, honestly. I mean,
I had fun. Thank you.
Not from you. I always enjoy talking to you, but sometimes you're talking about this whole voting thing and whether or not to engage. It can be a little so. Anyway, all right, guys, that's it for us. Go check out the Mises Caucus if you're so inclined. And until next time, peace.
LPMisesCaucus.com. Have faith.
Yeah.